countdown of our fall sermon series. This is your top 3 favorite Bible story, Noah's Ark. This story takes up 5 chapters in the book of Genesis. Mark just shared one portion with you. And in chapter 5, we learned that Noah was the direct descendant of Adam. In one chapter, the Bible fast forwards through 1,056 years of history in 32 short verses. In summary, there are 10 generations between Adam and Noah. I can name them if you'd like, but it's just a bunch of names, so you can imagine begat, 10 times, until we get to Lamech, Noah's father. And Lamech was 182 years old when Noah was born. He lived 595 years after Noah's birth, according to Genesis. So either they counted their years differently back then, or they had some powerful stuff to eat and drink, right? to keep them living longer. Now, I don't think you chose this story as one of your favorites because of the longevity of the main characters. Perhaps it was the epic storybook proportions of the flood that attracted you. Or maybe it was the fact that in this story, God is personified. He speaks directly to Noah, and he even closes the door, God's self. Or perhaps you love the fact that the bad people are all washed away, and the good people survive the flood. Some of us take joy when others get what's coming to them, don't we? Maybe you just love rainbows, like the rainbow that Amy Matthews painted for us in her painting Hope following our flood. Maybe you love the promise that God will never totally wipe out humanity again. Whatever your reason for choosing this story, I hope you will accept my invitation to read in between the lines of this very well-known and well-worn story this morning. In between the lines and perhaps a bit outside the box. The storybook that I read to you from is called Noah's Wife, the story of Naahmah. It was written by Sandy Eisenberg Sasso, who was the second woman to ever become a rabbi in the Jewish faith in 1974. Sandy's story about Noah's wife, Naahmah, comes from the Jewish Midrash tradition. The word Midrash means to fill in the blanks of a story, to tell the story between the lines of the author's voice. And in the Jewish tradition, when they meet for worship, a very small section of the sacred text is read, and the majority of their time is spent together discussing their opinions, talking about how a little bit of scripture goes a long way in each different phase of life and time. And in my seminary studies, they even showed us one of the original scrolls of the Torah, the first 5 books of our Old Testament. And in the Jewish scroll, there's a large page, and the text is only in one small corner of the page, and all of the rest of the page is filled with midrash. I think this is a beautiful tradition that we Christians could learn a lot from, and that we could get a lot from if we would follow our Jewish brothers and sisters. But back to Noah and Naahmah. In an ancient Hebrew text, the Bereshit Rabbah, chapter 23, verse 3, we can read the following. Naahmah was Noah's wife. And why was she called Naahmah? Because her deeds were naimim, or pleasant. Sandy leaned on this verse in her writing of the book, which I shared with you this morning. And there's another children's book about Naahmah and the Ark at Night. The author, Susan Campbell Bartoletti, tells us that the name Naahmah means great singer. And in Susan's book, Noah's wife sings lullabies to all of the animals on the ark and to her family who is trying to sleep amongst the cacophony of animal sounds and smells. Naahmah in this story is the one who brings peace in the midst of a terrible storm. And I love these additions to the biblical text. In fact, the story that we find in Genesis is also considered an addition to some very old myths that actually predate the writing of the Hebrews. There are flood myths from the Hindu tradition in India and from the ancient civilizations in Mesopotamia, Sumeria, and Babylon. You may have heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is an account which far predates our Hebrew scriptures. And there are further flood myths from the ancient Greeks, Plato's Timaeus, the Native American people of North America, the Musaka, the natives of South America, and the Kiish and Maya peoples of Central America. It seems that everybody loves a good flood. What's different about our account in Genesis then? In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero is saved in a boat, and a crew is brought on board to assist him in sailing to safety. In our account of Noah, however, our hero builds a rudderless ark. He cannot steer this big boat. He is totally dependent on the protection and guidance of God. Perhaps this is one message from Noah and from God for us during the wake of our own flood. One of biblical proportions, if you listen to the American news media and the weather forecasters. That's what they called our 1,000-year flood, a flood of biblical proportions. But I think maybe they hadn't taken a look at the Bible text in a while. If you look back, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, not 4 or 5 days. And the floodwaters stayed submerging the earth for 150 days. Not a few days or a few weeks as we've experienced here. That is a flood of truly biblical proportions. And if you look at our flood, it almost seems small in comparison. Until you realize that the flood story in Genesis is an epic myth. It's an imagined story. It's an illustration. It probably never happened the way that the author recorded it in Genesis. Our flood was and is a reality. I spent Friday night and Saturday morning of this weekend with John Philip Newell. He's a theologian and an expert in Celtic spirituality. Some of you may have heard of him or read some of his books. He lived and worked on the Isle of Iona in Scotland, a tiny place where I spent some time back in 2006 after I lost my marriage and my job and I was looking to start over. Iona is a magical island. You often can't tell where the sea meets the sky in that part of Scotland. The colors are beautiful, and the people who make pilgrimages there come from all over the world, from different faiths, different cultures. So why travel by land and sea? You can't drive there. You have to take a ferry to the island, and no cars are allowed because it's too small. Why travel by land and sea halfway across the world to reach a tiny, remote Scottish island? The pilgrims all had something in common, something that I shared with them too on my pilgrimage. They and we were looking for something, for connection, for healing, for renewal. We too are looking for that today in the wake of our real flood experiences, aren't we? We need to reconnect with our neighbors, strangers, and friends, with those outside of our small town who long to lend a helping hand, even with ourselves and our own emotions. We want to be healed, to stop jumping when we hear the sound of rain on the roof, to stop dreaming about what did happen or what could have happened. We want to be renewed, to find a wellspring of energy, to clean up our homes and our neighborhood, our town, and our lives, to begin again. But how do we start? Or how do we continue? John Philip quoted St. Columba, a monk who spent his life on the Isle of Iona in the 6th century. And he wrote a set of rules for monastic life, how to live in a monastery together with other monks. Columba said that when we weep, something of the salt sea within us is released and begins flowing again. The water which comprises our physical bodies is the same as the water that you find in the sea. And to reconnect ourselves to God and to one another, one simple method is to release our internal flood. Columba advised, pray until the tears come. Now, I'm not here to ask you to cry. I hate to be emotionally manipulated in church or anywhere else. But if you find your tears flowing in the wake of this flood, I just want to tell you that tears can be holy. The church is not here to give you some wisdom or teaching that you do not already know. The Celts believe that the church exists to remind the people of the wisdom that you were born with. The knowledge that God lives within you, as God lived within Noah, whose name, consequently, means rest. The church is a reminder that when we rest in God, we find the strength to build a rudderless ark and let the Lord steer us through deep and difficult waters. And sometimes we need to pray until the tears come, releasing our stress and our fear, loneliness, pain, and whatever darkness is within us. Why ever you chose this story, whatever Midrash brings it to life for you, whatever point or purpose you find in these words or in your own reflections about Noah and Naahmah, know that stories do not belong to those who write them, nor to those who tell them, but to those who need them. And today we need the story of Noah and Naahmah, of gathering seeds and of replanting, of resting and letting God steer us. May this story be your story, and may it give you comfort, peace, and encouragement, just like the singing of Naahmah in the dark nights aboard the ark. Amen.